art should not hurt people. More specifically, the creation of art should not negatively impact collaborators and contributors regardless of perfectionism or what people describe as suffering for your art.
Na mach doch deinen Scheiß!
Maybe you're suffering for your art, but your crew might just be trying to put food on the table, and your cast might want to explore character without the fear of verbal abuse. Just because your vision was sourced from suffering does not mean its creation has to be. Let me make an important distinction. If you're a solo artist and you've decided suffering is an essential component of your work, go ahead. Starve your way through some extended performance art piece or paint with your wang.
I don't give a fuck.
But if you are in a leadership position for a creative endeavor, you may very well wield the power to negatively affect your team and collaborators. This is a discussion you need to be part of. I'm going to break down the issues I'm referring to, my arguments against them, common counter-arguments, and thoughts on how these can and should change. I'm going to mostly focus on the film industry and the examples that I give, but I think a lot of this is broadly applicable. When I would have this discussion with people in the past, I would generally use one of the most notorious examples in the film industry, which is Stanley Kubrick's alleged psychological abuse of Shelley Duvall during the production of The Shining. However, having researched the topic in greater detail, it seems that the actual situation doesn't exactly reflect the commonly told stories. Even if the true events are not as dramatic as those described, the pervasiveness of reports of abusive work environments in the film industry is too strong to be ignored. In some cases, there's even direct recordings of such abusive behavior, like in the case of David O. Russell.
Hey, bitch! I'm not here to be fucking yelled at. I worked on this fucking thing for 3 fucking years, not to have some fucking cunt yell at me!
How does this happen? How does a person like this come into a position of power? Well, it's complicated. One of the problems is that in creative fields, since you don't have to acquire some kind of license or pass an exam, with the right network, a lot of the wrong people can end up in these positions of power. Once someone has a reputation based off of their work, they also seem to be permitted to treat others as lesser than, which is a completely ridiculous supposition. A key aspect of this issue is that because there are so few desirable film industry jobs, and you can't wave a certificate around to get them usually, a lot of people are more willing to put up with unfavorable conditions than in other industries, and on top of that you're expected to be grateful for this opportunity you've been given. But that gratitude will start dwindling once you gain a bit of perspective on the work conditions of other employers and industries.
You get paid, but you don't get paid. We get paid.
Okay, let me refocus. Let's put aside the potentially devastating harm you could contribute to all those involved in your project. Let's look at the fact that it's simply not necessary to act like a jackass in order to make good work. I've been on shoots with nice people and it was smooth sailing. I've been on shoots with dickheads that produced chaos.
We cannot have you around us screwing things up!
Some of the projects turned out good, some of them turned out bad. And it wasn't always relative to the conditions of the set. But in none of these cases did having an unpleasant working environment help anyone.
You don't say.
Before I get into the typical counter-arguments, I'd like to say that no amount of suffering for the art can justify creating a shitty working environment. If you behave in a way that negatively affects your team and the project turns out great, they achieved that despite of your wankery and not because of it.
All right, geez.
Furthermore, as a forewarning, if you behave like an asshole when you're starting out, no one will want to work with you. You can't avoid conflict. But how you handle it and how you deal with resolving it can make a nightmare into a hiccup, and vice versa. Some of the major arguments dismissing the pervasiveness of abusive work environments on film sets usually seem to point towards differences in set culture and societal views. Cultural differences in that some might suggest that what seems like a career-ending argument in one country where you generally can't question people above you in the hierarchy might simply be an average day at work in another country. Even within a culture, there are huge differences in how people behave depending on the nature of the set and who's running it. which comes back to the responsibility of leaders, but I'll get into that in a bit. Disagreements are unavoidable, and conflict resolution looks different in different cultures and in different teams. But I think we can, to a workable degree, distinguish between creative differences in discussion as opposed to abusive conditions in which collaborators feel berated, misused, or even unsafe. Now, to what extent these behaviors are culturally accepted will naturally differ, but my contention remains that no amount of abusive behavior belongs in any workplace run by grown people. And yet, I've seen some absolute lunacy on sets and in production offices. If you're an adult that can't keep your emotions in check, maybe you're not meant to work in a team, never mind lead one. The argument some people will make to dismiss abusive work environments is to say that these reports are a product of today's soft society that can't handle raised voices and harsh criticism.
No backbone, your generation.
They'll pick some wild but renowned director or a crazy production and say, look at what amazing work they created. But do you think those conditions really made those films what they are? Or is it maybe that in some cases they overcame that situation to make a masterpiece? Not all diamonds are made under pressure. And if you think you need to create an unhealthy working environment to get the results you want, maybe you need to rethink your directing style before you decide to potentially irreversibly damage people's psyche, because you might not be as talented as you think. This bizarre glorification of egomaniacal assholes for the sake of cinema never fails to baffle me. Let me emphasize, I'm not knocking the final piece. It might be a masterpiece, but I'm definitely knocking the methods. I'm not saying you can't be firm. You're in a position as a decision maker. You're going to have to step on some toes.
Figuratively speaking, of course.
As a reminder, we're talking about net negative impact and abuse. If you're damaging people, it's not fucking worth it. This leads to the pinnacle of the support for toxic work environments. I would ask people the question, do you think that people should suffer for the creation of art? I would of course clarify that I mean a team and give an example, but even then I was always shocked at the amount of people that said it's okay if it leads to the creation of great work. I mean, if you really love making art, that makes sense. It seems almost reasonable. There's a reason people describe their art as their work. It's not always fun. But practically speaking, that answer means nothing. You can't always tell if a given decision or process is going to lead to great work. Are you really going to risk hurting your team to find out? And if you're anyone other than the project lead or a HOD, you kind of don't even have a say in it. If you're going past legal overtime because something isn't quite perfect, it's hard to say no when your rent money could be on the line if you're not on the next call sheet because you can't handle the grind. I know work laws and unions should protect us from this, but how many times have you been on a set that unwaveringly went by the book? This also implies that you're working somewhere that has specific laws and unions in place to protect people in your specific industry, which is not always the case. Now look, if this project is your darling and you're finally at the helm of the creative project of your dreams, I get that. You want to make the best thing possible. But the people helping you make that dream a reality are not you. They're there to help you, but this isn't their baby. Don't expect them to be willing to put the same things on the line as you. I would lay my argument out like this, which I consider very reasonable and what I thought was a very uncontroversial opinion, and yet people would say no. Art is suffering, and if you're not willing to do that, do something else.
Or fuck you people, fuck you and you.
So much great work has come from places other than suffering, from teamwork, from focus, from openness. The best creative environments are open to collaboration and bringing forward different ideas and solutions whilst preserving the space to give clear direction. If your work mentally or physically damages your crew, your cast, or the local people where you're shooting, you're doing something wrong. You're not using creative talent, you're using abusive force. As far as I'm concerned, you're not an artist, you're a dictator, and you can fuck right off with that.
Easy, tough guy.
Okay, I did shit a lot on film directors in this since that's what I'm pursuing, but this obviously goes for producers, HODs, artists who run studios, composers, agencies, actually anyone who leads a team, really. So what can we actually do? I think the most important thing I can say is to be the change you want to see. My impression is that things are already moving in that direction. People seem more conscious of working conditions and identifying toxic work environments regardless of the industry. But that doesn't eliminate it. It needs to come from the top down. So if you're working hard to get to one of those positions in which you lead a creative project or department, I hope you're thinking about how you can protect your team and how you would have liked to be treated when you started out. That's a good reminder, by the way. If you're leading, you need to protect your team. That means eliminating toxic team members. That means making sure your team knows they can approach you with issues. The fundamentals of leading a team don't change because you're a creative. If you're pulling your team down, you're a wanker regardless of your industry. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences about this topic. Do you have any ideas how we can improve working conditions and do less harm? I know a lot of this sounded very negative, but I think we're actually moving in a positive direction, and I really hope it continues that way. Thanks for listening, and see you soon.